Welcome to my channel, The World of Science Fiction. Don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. General Lyrixa did not believe in mercy, not because she lacked the capacity, she simply considered it inefficient. In her 32 years of military service, spanning 5 sectors and 6 official wars, Mercy had yet to improve a single outcome. She stood with her arms crossed behind her back on the bridge of the Carthessa, her armor whispering with faint servo clicks as her weight shifted. Through the obsidian window, the pale blue crescent of Virella Prime glowed against the void. Its surface flickered with distant kinetic flashes, tracer lines of a skirmish still underway. Her skirmish. Field Commander reports the outpost is almost clear, General, said Subcommander Vex, his voice clipped. We located one human, non-combatant, refused evacuation, still patching up wounded from both sides. Lyrixa arched one long, pale eyebrow. Her ears, sleek and tapering well beyond the crown of her head, gave a twitch of irritation. Still there? Among our wounded? He's applying thermal salves and singing, Vex added, hesitating. Singing, she repeated flatly. Is that a weapon? No, General. It appears to be a melody. Something about boots made for walking. Lyrixa exhaled through her nose. Patch me into his feed. A moment later, the display bloomed with the image of a ruined medical station, half buried under collapsed ceiling panels. Smoke curled gently. The human, disheveled, smeared with green and purple blood, was leaning over a tri-limbed corporal, humming badly as he cinched a dressing. There we go, he muttered. You're stable. You're gonna make it. And if you don't, I swear to whatever gods you pray to, I'm billing your family for emotional damage. Lyrixa stared. The human was average height, unarmored, and wore a torn field medic patch over a sweat-darkened shirt. His eyes were focused, calm. In defiance of everything around him, he looked almost cheerful. Is he unaware he's behind enemy lines? She asked. Vex cleared his throat. He seemed aware. Declined extraction twice. Said, and I quote, too many people leaking weird colors. Can't leave yet. Lyrixa tilted her head. What's his name? Corporal Eli Vance. She studied the screen for a long moment, then nodded once. Bring him in. Alive. If he resists, sedate him. Gently. Vex hesitated. He's not resisting. He just keeps asking for more gauze and coffee. When they finally retrieved the human, he was mid-argument with one of her junior medics about proper suture tension on scaled skin. You're looping too tight, buddy. Unless your plan is to turn this guy into a sausage link. The alien medic growled in protest. Eli grinned. Hey, don't be mad. I insult because I care. They carried him aboard the Carthessa not as a prisoner, but as a curiosity. He didn't flinch under the alien stares. Didn't cower when the ship's automated defense grid scanned him in 6 languages. In fact, when Lyrixa finally stood before him, 7 feet of armored authority, war medals etched into her collar, he smiled and asked, So, does this place have coffee, or do I need to charm it out of the guards? Her soldiers stiffened. Lyrixa, to her own surprise, found herself answering, We synthesize a dark energy stimulant in the lower decks. It's bitter and causes temporary telepathy in rodents. Eli blinked. Perfect. That's my preferred flavor profile. Something shifted. She didn't know what it was. Perhaps the way he looked at her. Not with fear, not with awe, but with unfiltered curiosity, as if she were the strange one in the room. And perhaps, for the first time, she was. That night, Lyrixa reviewed the footage of the outpost 3 times. She had led armies across the stars, crushed rebellions, burned cities from orbit, but she had never watched a human tuck a blanket over a wounded alien, then mutter, Don't die, buddy. You still owe me a fist bump. And for the first time in cycles, she felt something unexpected pressing at the edge of her mind. Not doubt, not confusion, respect. Uninvited, but impossible to ignore. The Carthessa's medbay was not designed for humans. The lighting was too dim, the walls slightly curved in unsettling ways, and the beds were longer than necessary, as if everyone was expected to be built like a space giraffe with fashion sense. Eli squinted at a diagnostic panel, tapping random glyphs until the screen gave up and shut off. All right, I see we speak different languages, but you didn't have to sulk about it, he muttered. The nurse attending him, a green-scaled woman with 4 eyes and what might have been a permanent sneer, grunted and handed him a nutrient tube. He sniffed it cautiously. Is this soup or industrial glue? No one has died from it, she replied in a tone that made it sound like a challenge. Eli leaned back on the examination platform, trying to pretend the buzzing above his head wasn't scanning his spleen. Again. It had been 2 days since his voluntary abduction, as he called it, and so far the only consistent thing about alien medicine was its enthusiastic overuse of bioluminescent gel. He hadn't seen General Larixa again, not since she'd raised an eyebrow at his caffeine request and promptly vanished in a swirl of command protocols. But her soldiers kept watching him, some with suspicion, others with what he could only describe as awkward reverence. One even asked if he was the healer who sings war wards. He'd corrected her. That was a Nancy Sinatra song, and received only a confused blink in return. At noon cycle, a guard escorted him, no restraints but definitely a pulse rifle, to a chamber that could have been either a briefing room or a high-stakes interrogation theater. Larixa was already waiting, helmet off, her hair braided down her back like coiled night. She sat at the far end of a long, crystalline table, fingers steepled, expression unreadable. Corporal Vance, she said, your medical certifications are basic. Thank you, he offered. And yet, she continued, you performed a thoracic repair on a trivascular soldier under active fire with improvised tools. Yeah, your field kits are missing half the essentials. I had to use a heat blade as a retractor. Also, your soldiers don't respond well to sarcasm during surgery. One tried to stab me. He survived. I noticed. I stitched him up while he was unconscious. He now has a tattoo of a duck on his thigh. Long story. A pause. Then, so subtle it might have been imagined, her mouth twitched. Why do you help us? Eli blinked. Because you were bleeding, and because I had nothing better to do. Your shuttle fried my comms and I'm pretty sure you vaporized my sandwich. I approved no such action. Tragic. It had pickles. Silence stretched again. Only this time it wasn't heavy. Just waiting. Lyrixa stood, circled the table slowly. Your people call us enemies. Yours called us infection, so you know. Pot, kettle, interstellar furnace. Her boots stopped inches from him. You act like none of this frightens you. It does, constantly. I'm terrified. He grinned. But I learned a long time ago that when the universe makes no sense, the least I can do is pretend I do. Lyrixa regarded him. Up close, her armor wasn't just ceremonial. It was smart plate, humming faintly with embedded processors. Her long ears twitched as though catching invisible signals. You are either a fool, she said, or you are profoundly dangerous. Eli spread his hands. Why not both? That night he found a real bed in a private chamber. Too long, too firm, but mercifully free of beeping machines. A tray appeared outside his door with another tube of mystery nutrition, and to his astonishment, a steaming cup of something vaguely coffee-adjacent. It smelled like burnt wood and starlight. A folded note sat beside it, written in sharp strokes of common interlingua. For the fool, or the dangerous one. L, he sipped the brew and made a face. Okay, we're working on the coffee, but she's trying. And he wasn't sure why that meant more to him than it should. By the third week aboard the Carthessa, Eli had learned several important truths. First, never touch anything glowing unless you wanted a third-degree burn, a hallucination, or an impromptu lecture from a being with 7 tongues. Second, Lyrix's crew ran a tighter schedule than a nuclear cardiologist on espresso. And third, most surprisingly, he was starting to like it here. Not permanently moved to the murder ship like, but enough to stop flinching every time a bulkhead door opened with a hiss like a vengeful spirit. Enough to banter with the guards. Enough to figure out how to sneak sugar into the bitter stim broth without starting a diplomatic incident. It was during one of these culinary experiments that Larixa summoned him again. No formal command, just a word passed through a very apologetic ensign who looked like he'd swallowed a wrench. The war room this time wasn't empty. Instead, it hummed with tension. A trio of officers flanked Larixa, her long ears tipped forward in subtle alert. A holomap shimmered above the table, planets and fleet movements suspended in quiet precision. Eli strolled in, mug in hand. Am I interrupting evil plans? Or is this a bake sale meeting? I brought caffeine. One of the officers growled. Another muttered, he shouldn't be here. Lyrixa didn't even blink. Corporal Vance is here by my order. I feel like that should come with a badge. Eli whispered to no one in particular. She gestured to the map. This is the Sarin Belt, a disputed border. We intercepted a distress signal from a civilian freighter in this sector. Our patrol is closest. One officer scoffed. It could be a trap, or bait, or, Eli said, sipping his mug, it could be a bunch of scared people dying in the dark. But hey, moral dilemmas are my favorite. Lyrixa glanced at him, sharp, calculating. You would go? I would patch them up, tell bad jokes, and probably insult their oxygen recycling units. But yeah, I'd go. Silence fell. Then with the subtle grace of a blade sheathing itself, Lyrixa said, prep a team. I'm going too. That decision sparked a storm of protest. General, it's unnecessary. You shouldn't risk yourself. It's my order, she cut in. Her voice didn't rise. It simply ended the argument. If the trap is real, I'm more useful alive than remote. If it isn't, then we're doing what we claim to stand for. Hours later, Eli stood at the edge of the drop hangar, zipping up a field vest 3 sizes too big and checking his med kit for the 6th time. Beside him, Lyrixa adjusted the locks on her personal armor. Sleek, dark silver with coiling lines that pulse softly, alive with reactive shielding. You don't have to come, she said, not looking at him. I really do, Eli said. Otherwise, who's going to teach your soldiers that painkillers are not snacks? She exhaled something that could have been amusement or exasperation, maybe both. You're reckless, and you're secretly kind. Look at us, a disaster and a sword trying to do first aid. They boarded the shuttle with 6 soldiers, none of whom seemed entirely comfortable with a general and a human medic sharing a mission. The journey was brief. The freighter, when they found it, was worse than expected. Scorched hull, no response on all frequencies, and its life support systems flickering like an old neon sign. They docked. Lyrixa went in first, sword drawn but eyes wary. Inside it was chaos. Cracked panels, scorched corridors, wounded civilians huddled in corners. One alien child clutched a broken comm unit, sobbing softly. Eli pushed past the guards. We've got life signs. Grab stretchers. Triage here. Lyrixa barked orders in her native tongue. Sharp, rhythmic, almost musical. Her soldiers obeyed instantly. Within minutes, a makeshift medbay formed in the docking bay. As Eli crouched to splint a shattered leg, the child with the comm unit watched him. You're not one of them, she whispered. He winked. Not officially. I'm more like the onboard chaos consultant. The girl smiled. Lyrixa, watching from a distance, felt a shift again. Not in strategy or hierarchy, but in something harder to measure. Influence. Respect. A subtle gravity forming around the man who refused to act like a hero, yet kept saving everyone anyway. She'd brought him to observe. Instead, the entire crew was beginning to orbit him. The return to the Carthessa was supposed to be quiet. Simple triage, debrief, maybe a few medals handed out with the usual dry ceremony. Instead, it started with fire alarms, a self-heating bandage igniting a storage crate, and Eli Vance sliding into the medbay on his knees while shouting, "Nobody panic! I have absolutely no idea what I'm doing." 3 medics and a small cleaning drone smothered the flames, while Lyrixa arrived mid-chaos, her armor still flecked with soot from the rescue mission. Do I want to know? She asked dryly. Eli stood up, brushing ash off his sleeves. I tried to replicate Earth gauze. It turns out your auto fabricators think cotton is a fuel source. One of the nurses hissed, cradling a slightly burned tentacle. Eli turned to her. I'm sorry, that was not the warm compress I promised. Lyrixa sighed and stepped forward, lifting one hand. Let me see. I'm fine, the nurse muttered, but Lyrixa was already examining the injury. Her fingers were precise, gentle. Eli watched her with a curious tilt of his head. Didn't peg you for the hands-on type, he said. My soldiers expect it of me, she replied, binding the burn with quick efficiency. And you need a keeper. I've been saying that for years. Later, as the dust settled and the injured from the freighter were moved to quarantine bays, Eli found himself summoned again. This time not to the war room or the med bay, but Larixa's personal quarters, a rarity among her kind. Few were ever invited, fewer returned with the same understanding of her. The door hissed open to a room unlike anything he'd expected. Instead of cold steel and weapons displays, there were maps, hundreds of them, suspended in layered light. Some showed planets, others star maps with hand-drawn notes scribbled in glyphs. One corner featured a dried flower preserved in stasis, its color still vibrant. "You live in a museum," Eli said softly, stepping in. "I archive places I never had time to understand," she replied, "or places I destroyed." He turned toward her. "That's heavy. It's honest." A silence passed, filled only by the low hum of ambient gravity stabilizers. She moved to a console and tapped a sequence. A section of wall slid aside to reveal a small window, an actual window, looking out onto the planet they'd just left. "It was a trap once," she said. "5 cycles ago, they lured a fleet commander here, killed him in orbit. But this time, it was just a broken ship and frightened people," Eli said. Larixa nodded. "I've seen so much violence I sometimes expect it before it arrives. You remind me to wait before I act," he smirked. "I've been told I'm a walking timeout." She turned to him, then, more open than he'd seen her. "What made you stay, Eli?" He blinked. "You mean on your ship? On your side?" "Yes," he considered. "You didn't kill me when I asked for coffee. That was encouraging." A laugh, small, surprised, escaped her. He grinned wider. "But really," he continued, "it's because I see something in you. You bark orders like a tyrant, sure, but then you cradle a burned nurse like she's glass. You care more than you want anyone to know. And you," she said slowly, "hide pain behind humor." "Yeah, it's kind of my whole thing." She took a step closer. "We are both good at pretending." Another pause. Long, meaningful. Then, because tension was allergic to Eli's personality, he said, "Also, I like your hair braids. Very galactic warlord meets fashion blogger." She blinked once, then looked down and shook her head with what might have been a smile. "You are impossible. I've been called worse." Outside the window, the planet turned slowly, its clouds trailing across its surface like lazy ghosts. Inside, the general and the medic stood in quiet balance. Two different worlds finding, strangely, a shared orbit. Neither knew what it meant yet, but both felt the pull. The galley of the Carthessa was never quiet, not because of conversation, but because the food processors hissed, steamed, and occasionally made noises that sounded like philosophical debates between toasters. Eli had started eating there more often, partly because the soldiers were warming to him, and partly because he wanted to keep a close eye on whatever the kitchen labeled as meat-like compound. He was mid-bite of something purple and regret-flavored when the seat across from him shifted. Larixa sat down, still in uniform, her expression unreadable except for the faintest crease at the corner of her eyes. A crease he was learning to interpret as not displeased. "Afternoon, General," Eli said, raising his utensil in salute. "You're just in time for the edible gamble. Today's special is maybe fish." "I reviewed your medical logs. You have an iron deficiency. That would explain the cravings for nails." She slid a small capsule across the table. "Supplement. Your biology is fragile." "You say that like it's a bad thing." "I say that like I've had to revive you twice already." He shrugged and swallowed the pill dry. "See? Learning to take orders. You're rubbing off on me." She narrowed her eyes, but her voice was lighter. "Unlikely. You're the most insubordinate being I've ever met. And yet here we are. Sharing, is this lunch or a diplomatic engagement?" "I'm not sure," she admitted. Silence passed, broken only by the distant clang of a dropped tray and someone cursing in 3 languages. Finally, Larixa leaned forward. "There's a summit. Neutral ground. Representatives from both sides. They've asked me to attend." Eli set his fork down. "Big deal." "Yes, and they requested—" She hesitated. Actually hesitated. The general herself. "They requested you accompany me." Eli blinked. Me? Why? I'm not exactly known for my political finesse. They cited your impact, the freighter incident. Your presence has become a symbol. Symbol of what? That humans can ruin medical equipment and make jokes under pressure? She didn't answer. She didn't need to. He saw it in the way she looked at him. Not with command, but with trust. With something cautious and new. All right, he said. Let's go represent peace and probably offend at least one dignitary. The summit was held aboard the Halvarian Accord, a vessel so neutral it practically smelled of bureaucracy. Lyrixa stepped off the transport in full formal armor, freshly polished, every inch gleaming with authority. Eli followed in his best attempt at respectful clothing, which turned out to be a clean medic coat and shoes that didn't squeak. The dignitaries watched them with calculated eyes, some curious, others suspicious. Eli smiled and waved at one who flinched in return. We're off to a great start, he whispered. Lyrixa led the discussions with poise, navigating threats and promises with the grace of a swordswoman balancing on a tightrope. Eli sat back, occasionally scribbling sarcastic notes in a borrowed datapad. Representative Tralvax just blinked in Morse code, SOS. Did she just threaten economic annihilation or ask for tea? This room has all the warmth of a vacuum chamber. Midway through, a dispute broke out over trade sanctions. Voices rose, hands slammed. Someone accused someone else of orbital espionage. And that's when Eli stood up. Hey, he said, loud, clear, uninvited. Can we all take a breath? Maybe skip the part where we pretend yelling helps anything? The room froze. Lyrixa said nothing, only watched him. Eli continued. I've patched up soldiers on both sides. They all bleed. They all cry out for help. And not once have I heard one say, gosh, I'm glad my leaders shouted at each other instead of fixing this mess. Silence, thick, charged. Then to his shock, someone laughed. A ripple followed. A shift in the air. Later, as they walked the quiet corridors back to their transport, Lyrixa broke the silence. That was dangerous. Yeah, Eli said. But effective? Yes. A pause. And ridiculous. He grinned. My specialty. She didn't stop him when he offered her his arm for the walk back. Didn't comment when their steps began to sink. Behind them, in the halls of cold diplomacy, a whisper had already begun. The general and the healer. The sword and the fool. The ones who might just change everything. The night before the reconnaissance op, the Carthessa's hangar buzzed like a hive full of restless, over-caffeinated insects. Final diagnostics on the drop craft. Weapon systems humming. Pilots muttering into comms. It was routine, but the air carried a strange edge, like someone had tilted gravity just a few degrees off. Eli stood beside the dropship's access ramp, adjusting the straps on a medical bag that probably weighed more than he did. Why is it always me carrying the heavy stuff, he grumbled to no one in particular. Because you refuse to wear armor, Lyrixa said as she approached, her own exosuit glinting faintly with pale blue runes. He glanced at her. Armor itches, and it doesn't go with my charmingly unprofessional aesthetic. You're not unprofessional, she replied without sarcasm. You're unpredictable. There's a difference. Oh, you do care. She ignored that. We dropped near the ancient relay station, assess the anomaly, recover survivors if possible, then extract. It should be uneventful. Eli raised an eyebrow. That's what the last guy said before exploring a volcano with a parachute. Her squad, 6 elite troopers, boarded the dropship first. Lyrixa paused at the ramp and turned to him. Stay behind me this time. I always stay behind you, he said. It's safer, and I enjoy the view. The doors hissed shut. The ship lifted. Their destination, Dovrin 6, a moon wrapped in constant electrical storms and the kind of atmospheric pressure that turned most drones into confetti. A deep space research team had gone silent. No mayday, no data, just silence. That silence had lasted 4 days. They descended through turbulence thick enough to punch and landed on a fractured plateau near a metal structure half sunk in the ground like a forgotten relic. Lightning danced in the dark clouds above, but the surface was quiet. Too quiet. Eli hated quiet. Inside, the station was gutted. Lights flickered erratically. Walls bore scorch marks and clawed dents. The air smelled of burnt ozone and old panic. Lyrixa took point. Her helmet scanned for life. One faint biosign, deep chamber, 2 levels down. Let me guess, Eli said. No elevators. She didn't answer. Just moved forward. They advanced through twisted corridors and debris, Eli ducking under collapsed beams and muttering things like, definitely haunted and 10 out of 10 on the vacation scale. Her soldiers swept every corner with silent precision. On the lower level, they found the source of the signal. A single survivor, half conscious, wrapped in a thermal blanket, whispering nonsense. Eli knelt. Hey, easy. You're safe now. The man clutched at his sleeve. They woke it in the ice. The thing under... The ground trembled. Lyrixa's eyes narrowed. Time to leave. But the tremor deepened, a rhythmic pulse like something breathing beneath the station. Cracks split the floor. A blinding light erupted from beneath a storage panel, and something surged through, fast as thought. It wasn't alive in the way most things were. It shimmered like plasma and shadow, shifting forms with every blink. Soldiers fired. The energy creature moved between bolts, struck one down with a whip of light. Back, Lyrixa ordered, positioning herself between the being and Eli. He crouched over the survivor, shielding the man with his body. This isn't a medical emergency I'm trained for, Lyrixa engaged. Her blade, now charged with anti-phase resonance, cut through arcs of the creature's body. But it reformed. Every slash bought seconds, nothing more. Open comms, she barked. Eli tapped his wristband. Mayday, Carthessa, this is Ground Team Alpha. We've got a metaphysical plasma jellyfish trying to eat us. Kindly advise. The being pulsed violently, glowing with inner heat. Then, strangely, it paused, drifted closer to Eli, ignoring the weapons trained on it. It hovered inches from his face. He froze. Hello? A flicker, a sound. Not quite a word, but a pulse of understanding. Not attack, not threat. Recognition. It withdrew slowly, leaving behind a silence thicker than before. Lyrixa reached him, pulled him up. What just happened? I think it saw something in me, or I reminded it of someone. She looked shaken, not from fear, from uncertainty. They extracted in silence, survivors secured, no casualties except 2 burned rifles and 1 very shaken private. Hours later, as the Carthessa drifted quietly above the clouds of Davran 6, Lyrixa stood alone in the observation bay. Eli entered, silent for once, and joined her at the glass. Whatever that was, he said, it wasn't trying to kill us. Not really. No, she said softly. But something else woke up that day. And not just on the moon? She turned to him. In me. Eli blinked. Are we talking about feelings or alien plasma ghosts? Yes, she said. And that was somehow enough. The stars beyond the Carthessa stretched like endless needles across the fabric of the universe, pinpricks of light in a darkened canvas. The ship's hum was a lullaby, a contrast to the days of chaos, to the pulse of battlefields and the crackling tension of intergalactic politics. But for Eli Vance, the quiet felt strange now. It was the calm after a storm, the space between breaths. He stood at the observation bay, his reflection caught in the dark glass. Somewhere far below, 1,000 stories were unfolding. Civilizations building, warlords plotting, children dreaming. He had never expected to be a part of any of them. And yet, here he was, more a player than he had ever planned to be. The door behind him opened, and Lyrixa stepped inside. Her armor was no longer the pristine war gear of a general. It was a bit worn, its edges smoothed by countless battles. She had changed in ways he hadn't expected. And, he realized, he had changed too. Looking for answers? She asked, her voice low, the usual command gone. It was more human now. Looking for reasons, Eli replied, turning. I think we both know the answer to the first question, but the second one, I'm still not sure. She stepped closer, her long ears flicking in thought. The creature we faced, it was not a thing to be fought. It was a test. She paused. Of us, of who we are. Eli nodded slowly, understanding dawning on him. A test of what we were willing to become. Yes, she said softly, her eyes locking onto his. You have become more than you were, and so have I. The war, the endless cycles of power struggles and destruction, had shaped them both in ways they never intended. But they weren't the same anymore. Neither of them. We've seen what happens when we stay in our lanes, Eli said, his fingers tracing the edge of the observation window. But stepping out of it? That's what got us here. Lyric's gaze lingered on him, a quiet respect in her eyes. She didn't speak, only nodded. He could see the walls she had built around herself, walls that had been chipped away, little by little, through every mission, every moment they shared, even if none of it had been intentional. It was strange how things could change. How, in the vastness of space, in the heart of alien politics and the endless dance of war and diplomacy, one simple human could remind an alien general of her own humanity, and vice versa. Do you think this will last? Eli asked, the words feeling heavier than he'd meant. He glanced at her, the weight of all they'd been through pressing down. I mean, this whole peace thing we're building. Is it real? She tilted her head, her lips parting slightly. I think it depends on what we make of it. Peace. It's never something handed to you. It's something you choose. Over and over. It's a decision, not a gift. Her words were sharp, but there was warmth in them now, a warmth that he had never expected from someone like her. Lyrixa, the untouchable general. Lyrixa, who had stood above everyone, and now for the first time seemed human. Eli couldn't help but smile. You know, you've got this whole mentor vibe now. Makes me feel like I should be taking notes. I would not advise that, she said, the faintest hint of her old sharpness creeping back. You're not the type to follow instructions. True, he said, grinning, but you can't blame a guy for trying to be a little less chaotic, right? She gave a rare chuckle, her gaze softening. Number, but I'll blame you if you lose your sense of humor. There was a silence between them then, comfortable, understanding. The war was still out there, across the galaxy, in the far reaches of their territories, in the mess of politics and old grudges. But here, with her, in this fleeting moment of calm, Eli knew something had changed. They both had a choice now. A choice to continue walking the path they had begun together, or to forge separate destinies in the unforgiving galaxy. And for once, the universe didn't seem so big. It wasn't filled with just enemies, with fighting and survival. It was filled with choices, with people, with possibilities. Whatever happens next, Eli said, his voice soft but firm, let's make sure we don't forget this. Whatever we become, or whoever we're supposed to be, it started here, with you, with me, and with whatever the hell that creature was. Lyrixa nodded, her expression more open than he had ever seen. I will not forget. And as the Carthessa drifted into the stars, Eli allowed himself to believe that peace, however fragile, however hard-won, was not just possible, but within reach. For the first time in a long time, he wasn't fighting to survive. He was fighting for something better. And maybe, just maybe, it would last.